The worst mistake I ever made was ignoring her call at 2:13 in the morning. The whiskey in Adrian Moretti's glass hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Ice melted slowly beneath the amber liquid, while Manhattan glittered beyond the penthouse windows like a kingdom made of diamonds and lies. Men around him kept talking. Numbers, shipments, territory, millions of dollars traded in low voices beneath expensive chandeliers. Normally, Adrian noticed everything. Every twitch, every lie, every hidden intention. That was why men feared him. But that night, his attention drifted to the phone resting beside his hand. One missed call. Claire Bennett. The screen had gone dark almost an hour ago, but somehow it still felt like it was staring at him. Adrian leaned back slowly, jaw tight beneath the shadow of the city lights. Claire never called this late. Not unless something was wrong. Boss. Mateo's voice cut through the room carefully. You want us to move the Thursday shipment to Pier 47 or keep the original route? Adrian didn't answer immediately. His thumb brushed the edge of the phone instead. Claire's voicemail icon glowed quietly on the screen. One unheard message. Something cold moved through his chest. Not fear. Adrian Moretti did not scare easily, but instinct. The dangerous kind that had kept him alive since he was 18 years old and standing over his father's grave in Brooklyn rain. Boss. Mateo repeated. Adrian finally looked up. The room fell silent instantly. 6 men in tailored black suits stopped talking the second his eyes lifted from the phone. That was power. Real power. The kind that didn't need shouting. Adrian exhaled slowly. Handle the shipment without me. Mateo frowned slightly. Without you. Adrian stood, adjusting the sleeve of his charcoal cashmere coat with calm precision. Something came up. Nobody questioned him after that. Nobody was stupid enough. The private elevator carried him down 70 floors while thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson. By the time Adrian stepped into the back seat of the black Escalade, rain hammered the streets hard enough to blur the city into streaks of gold and gray. He pressed Claire's contact. Straight to voicemail. Again, his jaw tightened. Faster, he told the driver quietly. Lower Manhattan slid past the windows in flashes. Empty crosswalks. Steam rising from sewer grates. Neon reflections trembling across wet pavement. Adrian called again. No answer. Then his phone vibrated. A text message from Claire sent 43 minutes earlier. I didn't know who else to call. Something inside him dropped hard. Pull over, Adrian ordered suddenly. The SUV stopped beside the curb near the financial district. Adrian stared at the message for one long second before opening the location attached beneath it. Pier 47. His expression changed instantly. Mateo noticed from the passenger seat. What happened? Adrian looked out at the rain swallowing the city. Drive. His voice turned colder than winter glass. Now. The Escalade tore through the streets while thunder shook the skyline above them. Adrian's fingers curled slowly around the phone in his hand. Claire hated the docks at night. She once told him they made her feel lonely in a way she couldn't explain. Too dark. Too quiet. Too easy to disappear. And suddenly Adrian couldn't breathe properly because all he could picture was Claire standing alone beside black water with rain soaking through her coat while nobody came for her. Nobody except him. The SUV turned sharply onto the industrial harbor road. Cargo containers towered beside the pier like sleeping giants beneath the storm. Wind screamed across the docks. Somewhere in the distance, a ship horn echoed through the fog. Adrian stepped out before the vehicle fully stopped. Rain drenched his coat instantly. Claire. His voice cut through the storm for the first time in years, carrying something dangerously close to panic. Then he saw her, near the edge of the pier, motionless against the wet concrete beneath a broken harbor light. And for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Moretti forgot how to breathe. Rain crashed against the pier hard enough to sting Adrian's face, but he barely felt it. All he saw was Claire lying beside the rusted railing with one arm hanging dangerously close to the black water below. Her coat was soaked through. Blonde hair clung to her face in wet strands while the harbor light above flickered weakly across the concrete. For one terrible second, she did not move at all. Adrian crossed the distance faster than Mateo had ever seen him move. His polished shoes splashed through icy puddles as he dropped to his knees beside her. Claire. Her name left his mouth rougher than usual, stripped of control. He touched her cheek carefully. Freezing cold. His chest tightened instantly. Claire, look at me. Her eyelashes fluttered weakly. Relief hit him so suddenly it almost made him angry. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Adrian slid one arm beneath her shoulders while rainwater soaked into the sleeves of his coat. Claire winced softly the moment he moved her. "Easy," he murmured immediately. "I have you." Her lips parted slightly, trembling from cold. Adrian, hearing his name in her voice, nearly destroyed whatever restraint he had left. She sounded exhausted. Fragile. Nothing like the stubborn woman who used to glare at him across coffee shop tables and pretend she was not terrified of how much power he carried around like a second skin. "I am here," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Claire tried to laugh, but the sound came out weak and uneven. "You should not have come." Adrian stared at her in disbelief. Rain dripped from his dark hair onto his jaw while harbor wind whipped through the pier around them. "You called me." "I know." Her eyes drifted shut again for half a second too long. Panic sliced through him instantly. "Claire." His hand tightened gently around hers. "Do not do that." She opened her eyes again slowly. Blue-gray, glassy with exhaustion. "I did not think you would answer." The words hit him harder than any threat ever had. Behind them, Mateo and two security men approached carefully but stopped several feet away. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. Because Adrian Moretti was kneeling in freezing rain holding a woman like she was the only thing keeping his world from collapsing. And every man there understood they were witnessing something dangerous. Adrian brushed damp hair away from Claire's forehead with shaking fingers. He realized too late that his hands were trembling. Not from cold. From fear. Real fear. The kind he had buried years ago beneath money and power and carefully controlled violence. Claire noticed too. Even half-conscious, she noticed everything. "You are shaking," she whispered. Adrian swallowed hard. "You are bleeding and alone at 2 in the morning on a pier." His voice lowered dangerously. "What exactly did you expect me to do?" Her eyes filled slowly with emotion she was too tired to hide anymore. "I did not want to ruin your night." Adrian actually closed his eyes for a second after hearing that. Somewhere behind him, thunder rolled across the harbor. He exhaled slowly through his nose before looking back at her. "Claire." His voice softened in a way almost nobody ever heard. "Nothing in my life matters more than answering your call." She stared at him silently while rain poured around them in silver sheets. Then her breathing hitched sharply from cold. Adrian stood immediately, sliding one arm beneath her knees while the other secured around her back. Claire tensed weakly against his chest. "Adrian." No, his tone left no room for argument. "You are done trying to survive by yourself tonight." Mateo moved quickly toward the SUV, opening the rear door before Adrian reached it. The warm interior lights spilled across Claire's pale face as Adrian carefully settled inside beside her without letting go. Claire looked up at him through half-lidded eyes while the storm blurred the city outside the windows. "I really did not want to need you," she admitted softly. Adrian stared at her for one long moment before pulling off his coat and wrapping it around her shaking shoulders himself. "That is too bad," he said quietly, "because I am never letting you disappear like this again." The drive uptown felt strangely silent despite the storm. Rain streaked across the SUV windows and silver rivers while Manhattan blurred outside like a dream nobody could hold onto for long. Claire sat curled beneath Adrian's coat in the back seat, shivering lightly every few seconds no matter how high the heat climbed inside the vehicle. Adrian noticed every single one. He sat beside her without speaking much, one hand resting near hers on the leather seat, as though he was resisting the urge to check whether she was still there every 5 seconds. Across from them, Mateo pretended not to watch, but Adrian could feel his concern filling the space anyway. Nobody in Adrian's organization had ever seen him like this before. Calm under pressure was part of the myth surrounding Adrian Moretti. He did not panic. He did not lose control. Yet tonight, his pulse still had not settled since the moment he saw Claire lying near the water. Claire shifted weakly against the seat and stared toward the city lights beyond the glass. "You are angry," she said softly after several minutes. Adrian looked at her immediately. "I am terrified." The honesty in his voice surprised both of them. Claire turned slowly toward him, exhaustion written across every feature of her face. "I have never heard you admit that before." Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. "That is because nobody has ever made me feel it before." Silence filled the SUV after that. Heavy. Dangerous. Claire looked down at her trembling hands wrapped inside the sleeves of his oversized coat. The expensive black fabric nearly swallowed her whole. It smelled like cedarwood, rain, and Adrian himself. Safe. That realization scared her more than the storm outside. I almost called you 3 times this week, she admitted quietly. Adrian leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving her face. Why did you not? Claire laughed weakly without humor. Because every time I get close to you, my life becomes more complicated. Mateo glanced toward the driver silently before focusing back on the road ahead. Adrian stayed perfectly still beside her. Complicated does not explain why I found you alone on a freezing pier after midnight. Claire swallowed hard. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the rain outside before returning to him again. Someone has been following me. Every muscle in Adrian's body went still. Not visibly. Most people would not have noticed the change. But Claire did. The temperature inside the SUV suddenly felt colder. Since when? He asked quietly. A few weeks. And you said nothing to me. Claire looked away first. I did not want this. Adrian stared at her profile illuminated by passing streetlights. Pale skin, damp blonde hair, shadows beneath exhausted blue-gray eyes. She looked like somebody who had been carrying fear alone for far too long. Claire. His voice lowered. Controlled. Dangerous in the calmest way possible. You do not get to decide alone when your safety becomes my concern. She turned sharply toward him. That is exactly the problem. The words came out stronger now despite her exhaustion. You talk like my life belongs to you. Adrian did not answer immediately. Thunder rolled somewhere over the East River while the SUV climbed toward the Upper East Side. Finally, he spoke quietly enough that she almost missed it. No, his eyes locked onto hers. I talk like losing you would destroy me. Claire forgot how to breathe for a second after hearing that. Adrian rarely spoke emotionally. Everything about him was controlled precision. Carefully measured words. Carefully measured expressions. But not tonight. Tonight his mask kept cracking every few minutes. And somehow that frightened her more than the stories people whispered about him in dark restaurants and expensive clubs. The SUV slowed beneath the covered entrance of Adrian's private estate overlooking the river. Warm golden lights glowed behind massive iron gates while security moved immediately toward the vehicle with umbrellas. Adrian stepped out first into the rain before turning back toward Claire. He held one hand out toward her calmly, patiently, like he already knew she was too exhausted to fight him anymore tonight. Claire stared at his hand for one long moment. Then she placed hers in it anyway, and Adrian's fingers closed around hers like he had been afraid she might disappear again. The estate felt unnaturally quiet after the storm outside. Warm light spilled across polished marble floors while fireplaces glowed softly behind walls of glass overlooking the river. Claire stood just inside the entrance, dripping rainwater onto a floor probably worth more than her entire apartment building. She suddenly felt painfully aware of how exhausted she looked. Wet clothes, smudged mascara, hair tangled by harbor wind. Adrian barely seemed to notice any of it. His focus never left her for more than a second. Dr. Hale is already here, Mateo said carefully from behind them. Adrian nodded once without looking away from Claire. Good. Claire immediately shook her head. I do not need a doctor. Adrian removed his gloves slowly, dark eyes fixed on her with that calm intensity that always made her nervous. Claire, I am serious. Her voice weakened slightly from exhaustion. I am cold and tired. That is all. Adrian stepped closer until she could smell rain and cedarwood clinging to his coat beneath the warmth of the house. You could barely stand when I found you. His tone stayed low, controlled. Somehow that made it more overwhelming. Humor me. Claire opened her mouth to argue again, but dizziness rolled through her hard enough that she reached for the nearest table automatically. Adrian caught her before she could stumble. One hand steadied her waist carefully while the other brushed damp hair back from her face. Easy, he murmured instantly. The softness in his voice made her chest ache unexpectedly. Claire looked up at him slowly. Adrian's expression shifted the moment he saw how pale she had become beneath the golden lights. Fear flashed across his face again before disappearing beneath control almost immediately. But she still saw it. I am okay, she whispered. Adrian stared at her for one long second, like he wanted desperately to believe her. Then he looked toward the staircase. Prepare the East Suite, he ordered quietly. Somewhere in the background, staff immediately moved. Claire blinked in confusion. Adrian, I am not staying here. You are tonight. I can go home. No, the answer came instantly. Firm. Final. Claire frowned weakly. You cannot just decide things for me. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. You are exhausted, freezing, and someone has been following you for weeks. He lowered his voice carefully. Tonight is not the night I pretend that does not matter. Before Claire could answer, an older man in a navy suit entered the foyer carrying a medical bag. Dr. Hale, gray-haired, calm-eyed, the kind of man who had clearly seen everything in life already. He glanced between Adrian and Claire once before understanding the situation immediately. Miss Bennett, he said kindly. May I? Claire sighed softly in defeat. Everybody in your life is terrifyingly efficient. Adrian almost smiled at that. Almost. 20 minutes later, Claire sat wrapped in a thick cream-colored blanket beside the fireplace, while Dr. Hale checked her pulse and blood pressure. Adrian never left the room once. He stood near the windows overlooking the river with one hand in his pocket, listening to every word without pretending otherwise. Severe exhaustion, Dr. Hale finally said calmly. Stress, lack of sleep, mild dehydration. His eyes lifted toward Adrian meaningfully. And she needs rest more than anything else. Adrian nodded once. Done. Claire rolled her eyes weakly. I love how everybody keeps answering for me tonight. Dr. Hale smiled slightly while packing his bag. That usually happens when someone nearly collapses in cold rain near the East River at 2 in the morning. Claire looked down immediately after that. Embarrassment twisted through her chest. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything about her. Dr. Hale left quietly a few minutes later, leaving silence behind with the crackling fireplace and distant thunder fading over Manhattan. Claire sat curled beneath the blanket staring into the flames while Adrian poured a glass of water from the crystal decanter nearby. He crossed the room slowly before kneeling in front of her himself. Not a servant. Not security. Him. Claire looked startled as he handed her the glass carefully. Drink. She obeyed without arguing this time. Adrian watched her for a moment before speaking quietly. You scared me tonight. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around the glass. I know. Adrian leaned back slowly against the chair across from her, dark eyes never leaving her face. No, he said softly. I do not think you do. Claire woke sometime after sunrise to the unfamiliar sound of silence. No traffic screaming outside thin apartment walls. No neighbors arguing through cracked ceilings. No buzzing fluorescent lights from the harbor office where she worked too many overtime hours pretending her life was still manageable. Just silence. Soft and expensive and almost unsettling in its perfection. Pale morning light spilled through towering windows across cream-colored walls and dark wood furniture that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine instead of someone's home. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the black cashmere coat folded neatly across the chair beside the bed and remembered everything at once. The pier, the rain, Adrian's voice breaking when he found her. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Her chest still felt heavy from exhaustion, but at least the freezing ache in her bones had faded. She pushed herself upright slowly and immediately noticed something else. Someone had changed the bandage wrapped around her hand while she slept. Clean, precise, careful. Claire stared at it silently. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the bedroom door opened slightly, and an older woman stepped inside carrying a silver tray with coffee and breakfast. Good morning, Miss Bennett, the woman said warmly. Mr. Moretti asked me to bring this up once you woke. Claire blinked. He is here. The woman looked mildly confused. Mr. Moretti has not left the house. Something strange moved through Claire's chest hearing that. Adrian barely slept on normal days. She knew that much already. Men like him survived on stress and black coffee and control. Yet somehow she could picture him staying awake all night outside her room without hesitation. Thank you, Claire said softly. The woman smiled kindly before leaving again. Claire looked toward the tray afterward. Fresh fruit, tea, coffee exactly how she drank it. Not too much cream. 1 sugar. Her stomach tightened unexpectedly. Adrian noticed things most people ignored. That was part of what made him dangerous. Around 20 minutes later, Claire finally forced herself downstairs wearing an oversized sweater someone had left folded neatly outside the bedroom door. Probably another thing Adrian arranged without asking her. The estate felt different in daylight. Less intimidating. More lonely somehow. Massive windows overlooked the gray river while quiet jazz drifted softly through hidden speakers somewhere in the walls. Claire followed the sound of voices toward the kitchen. She stopped the second she saw Adrian standing near the marble island with his phone pressed against one ear. Black dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. Dark hair still slightly damp like he had showered recently, but never bothered sleeping. "I do not care how much it costs," he said coldly into the phone. "Find out who has been near her office, her apartment, and the docks." Claire froze instantly. Adrian turned the moment he sensed her standing there. His expression changed immediately after seeing her awake. Softer, relieved. Later, he told whoever was on the phone before hanging up without waiting for a response. Silence settled between them for a second. Adrian looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like fear had worn him down overnight in ways he did not know how to hide anymore. "You should still be resting," he said quietly. Claire crossed her arms carefully. "You are investigating my life." Adrian did not deny it. "Someone followed you. That does not give you the right to control everything." Adrian studied her face for a long moment before walking slowly toward her. "Claire." His voice stayed calm. "You ended up alone on a freezing pier after midnight because you tried handling this by yourself. Because I knew what would happen if I involved you." Something flickered behind Adrian's eyes then. Hurt. Brief, but unmistakable. "And what exactly do you think would happen?" Claire laughed softly without humor. "The entire city is afraid of you, Adrian." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see exhaustion beneath his ocean blue eyes for the first time since meeting him. "Good," he said quietly. "Maybe whoever's scared you should be afraid too." Claire stared at him speechless while morning light spilled across the kitchen around them. Adrian's expression remained perfectly calm, but she was starting to realize calm was sometimes the most dangerous thing about him. Claire spent the next 2 days inside Adrian's estate pretending she was not slowly losing the ability to leave. Not physically. Nobody locked doors. Nobody followed her from room to room. The prison was emotional, and somehow that felt worse. Every corner of the house carried evidence that Adrian had rearranged his entire life around keeping her safe. Extra security appeared outside overnight. Black SUVs waited beyond the gates 24 hours a day. Men with discreet earpieces rotated shifts near the perimeter like silent shadows. And Adrian himself barely left her side longer than necessary. Claire noticed everything. The way his phone constantly buzzed with updates he ignored whenever she entered a room. The exhaustion darkening beneath his eyes each morning. The terrifying calm in his voice whenever someone mentioned the docks or her apartment building. By the third night, Rain returned to Manhattan again. Claire stood alone near the library windows watching lightning flicker over the river while anxiety twisted tighter in her chest. She hated feeling helpless. Hated depending on someone else for safety. Especially someone like Adrian Moretti. The library door opened softly behind her. "You skipped dinner." Adrian's voice carried through the dim room low and smooth like midnight itself. Claire did not turn around immediately. "I was not hungry." Adrian approached slowly until his reflection appeared beside hers in the dark glass. Tall, composed, beautiful in the dangerous way storms were beautiful from far away. "You are thinking too much again," he said quietly. Claire folded her arms tighter. "And you are watching me too closely again." A faint, almost smile touched his mouth before disappearing. "Probably." Silence settled between them while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Claire stared out at the rain. "I cannot stay here forever." Adrian's reflection went still beside her. "Nobody asked you to." She finally turned toward him then. "That is not true." Adrian looked at her carefully. "You think protecting you means trapping you. Does it not?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Claire." He stepped closer. "Everything I have done since finding you on that pier has been because I was afraid of losing you." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache again. Claire hated how sincere he sounded when he admitted things like that. "You barely sleep anymore," she whispered. Adrian looked away briefly toward the storm outside. "Neither do you." Before Claire could answer, the sharp sound of a security alarm suddenly echoed faintly through the house. Adrian's entire expression changed instantly. Cold, focused, dangerous. Claire felt it like a physical shift in the air around him. A voice crackled through the speaker hidden near the ceiling. Movement at the south gate. Adrian moved immediately toward the communication panel beside the bookshelf. "How many?" "One vehicle. Black sedan. Driver left before identification." Claire's stomach tightened hard. Adrian's eyes darkened dangerously. License plate. Stolen. Silence followed. Heavy and wrong. Adrian stared at the panel for one long second before speaking again. Increase perimeter security. Nobody enters this property without my approval tonight. Understood. The line disconnected. Claire realized her hands were shaking slightly. Adrian noticed instantly. Of course he did. He crossed the room toward her immediately. Hey. His voice softened the second he saw fear on her face. Look at me. Claire tried to steady her breathing. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Adrian stopped directly in front of her. Tell me something honestly. His eyes locked onto hers with terrifying intensity. Before the pier, before you called me, did someone threaten you? Claire hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Adrian saw it instantly. Every muscle in his body went still. Claire. His voice lowered into something dangerously calm. What did they say to you? Her throat tightened. They told me I was getting too close to the wrong man. Lightning flashed across the windows behind them. Adrian's face changed in a way Claire had never seen before. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More personal. More final. And suddenly she understood something terrifying for the first time. Whoever had frightened her was no longer just Adrian's problem now. They had become his target. Adrian did not leave the library for a long time after Claire told him about the threat. He stood near the rain-covered windows with one hand resting against the marble fireplace, while silence swallowed the room around them. Claire watched him carefully from the leather sofa, trying to understand what was happening behind those cold blue eyes. That was always the hardest part about Adrian. Most people saw power first. Expensive suits. Armed security. The reputation that made grown men lower their voices when he entered a room. But Claire was beginning to realize the truly dangerous thing about Adrian Moretti was how quiet he became when something mattered to him personally. Why did you not tell me sooner? He finally asked without turning around. Claire wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Because I knew exactly how you would react. Adrian looked over his shoulder slowly. And yet you still called me that night. The room fell silent again after that. Claire stared down at her hands. She remembered standing alone on the pier with freezing wind tearing through her coat, while panic closed around her chest hard enough to hurt. She had stared at Adrian's number for almost 10 minutes before finally pressing call. Even then, she almost hung up before it rang. I was scared, she admitted quietly. Adrian's expression changed instantly hearing that. Something softer moved beneath the coldness in his face. He crossed the room slowly until he stood directly in front of her again. You should never reach a point where fear becomes normal. Claire looked up at him tiredly. Easy thing for someone like you to say. Adrian frowned slightly. Someone like me? She gave a weak laugh. You walk into rooms, and everybody listens. Nobody follows you into parking lots or waits outside your apartment building trying to send messages. Adrian stared at her for one long second before kneeling in front of the sofa unexpectedly. Claire's breath caught slightly. Men like Adrian Moretti did not kneel for anyone. Yet here he was looking up at her with exhausted honesty in his eyes. Claire. His voice lowered gently. You think I am powerful because people fear me. He shook his head once. But the truth is, power means nothing when somebody you care about is terrified, and you cannot fix it fast enough. Her chest tightened painfully hearing that. Adrian rarely let emotions show this openly. It felt strangely intimate even without him touching her. A sudden vibration broke the moment. Adrian pulled his phone from his pocket immediately. The second he saw the screen, his expression hardened again. What? He answered coldly. Claire watched the change happen in real time. The softness disappeared from his face like a door slamming shut. Silence stretched, while whoever spoke on the other end continued talking quickly. Adrian's jaw tightened more with every second. When? He asked quietly. Claire felt anxiety crawl slowly back into her stomach. Adrian listened another moment before ending the call abruptly. What happened? She asked immediately. Adrian stood slowly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Somebody broke into your apartment tonight. Claire went completely still. What? Security cameras were disabled first. His voice stayed calm in the worst possible way. Nothing was stolen. That somehow felt more terrifying. Claire stood too quickly from the sofa. Dizziness hit her immediately, but she ignored it. My apartment. Adrian moved closer instantly when he noticed her sway slightly. Easy. Why would somebody break in and take nothing? Adrian looked at her carefully. Because they wanted you to know they could reach you. Fear spread cold through Claire's chest. She suddenly pictured her tiny apartment exactly as she left it. The coffee mug still sitting beside the kitchen sink. The stack of paperwork near the couch. Her sweater hanging near the bedroom door. Somebody had been inside that space. Watching. Adrian noticed panic rising in her expression immediately. Hey. His hand closed gently around her wrist. Breathe. Claire tried. Failed. Adrian stepped closer without hesitation. Look at me. She did. His blue eyes stayed steady on hers. Calm. Focused. Protective in a way that somehow cut through her fear better than logic ever could. You are not alone in this anymore, he said quietly. Claire swallowed hard. Adrian. He tightened his hold on her wrist slightly. Not controlling. Grounding. Whoever did this wanted to scare you. His voice dropped lower. More dangerous. What they do not understand is that now they have my full attention too. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Claire realized she was no longer only afraid for herself. She was beginning to fear what Adrian might become if someone pushed him too far. Claire did not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined strangers walking through her apartment while she stood helpless miles away inside Adrian's estate. By 3 in the morning, Manhattan had gone quiet beneath the storm. The rain softened into a cold mist drifting across the river outside the windows, while most of the house remained dark except for the lights in Adrian's office downstairs. Claire noticed that too. He was awake. Again. She wrapped the oversized sweater tighter around herself before quietly leaving the guest room. The marble hallway felt almost unreal at night. Soft golden lights glowed against dark walls while silence stretched through the enormous house like something alive. Claire followed the faint sound of low voices toward Adrian's office near the west wing. The door stood partially open. She stopped before entering when she heard Matteo speaking. The apartment building manager confirmed the cameras went offline at exactly 11:42. Adrian stood beside the massive desk with one hand braced against the polished wood surface. And nobody saw anything? No, Matteo hesitated briefly. But there is something else. Adrian looked up slowly. Talk. Matteo slid a folder across the desk. Claire Bennett accessed shipping records connected to Harbor Logistics 3 weeks ago. Claire froze outside the doorway. Adrian's expression did not change, but the air in the room suddenly felt heavier. Why? Matteo shook his head. We are still trying to understand that. Adrian opened the folder slowly. Claire could not see the documents from where she stood, but she recognized the exhaustion settling deeper into his face while he read. Leave us, Adrian said quietly after several seconds. Matteo turned and immediately noticed Claire standing outside the office. His expression shifted slightly before he nodded respectfully and walked away without another word. Silence followed. Adrian remained still behind the desk for a moment before finally speaking. You should be asleep. Claire stepped into the room slowly. Apparently, I should also be explaining why I looked at shipping records. Adrian closed the folder carefully. Claire. No. Her voice came out sharper than intended. You do not get to investigate me behind closed doors and then act protective afterward. Adrian stared at her across the room. Dark dress shirt. Sleeves rolled up. Tie gone. He looked less like a feared criminal tonight, and more like a man carrying too much responsibility alone for too many years. Somehow that made him even more dangerous. Come here, he said quietly. Claire crossed her arms instead. Answer me first. Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose before leaning back against the desk. Harbor Logistics is connected to several import companies under my protection. Claire looked away briefly. I figured that out. How? She hesitated. Adrian noticed instantly. Claire. My younger brother worked at one of the warehouses. Adrian's expression changed slightly. Worked? Claire nodded once. Daniel disappeared 6 months ago. Silence crashed into the room after that. Claire looked down at her shaking hands. The police called it voluntary disappearance. Her voice weakened. But Daniel would never leave without contacting me. Adrian watched her carefully now. Not like a suspect. Like somebody finally understanding how much pain she had been carrying alone. You thought my organization was connected. Claire swallowed hard. I did not know what to think anymore. Adrian moved around the desk slowly. So you started investigating the docs yourself. I was desperate. Adrian stopped directly in front of her. And somebody noticed. Claire nodded weakly. The threats started after that. Adrian closed his eyes briefly like he was trying to contain something dangerous inside himself. When he opened them again, his voice had softened completely. Why did you not tell me about your brother? Claire laughed quietly without humor. Because you are Adrian Moretti. Meaning? Meaning men like you do not save people like me without wanting something back. The words landed harder than she intended. Adrian went completely still. Hurt flickered briefly across his face before disappearing beneath calm control again. Claire immediately regretted saying it. Adrian looked away toward the rain outside the office windows before speaking quietly. Claire. His voice sounded tired now, honest in a way she had never heard before. Do you really think I would spend nights terrified of losing you because I wanted something from you? Her chest tightened painfully. Adrian stepped closer again. I protected you because the thought of something happening to you makes me feel. He stopped suddenly like the emotion itself frustrated him. Claire looked up at him carefully. Makes you feel what? Adrian held her gaze for several seconds before answering in a voice barely above a whisper. Human. The next evening, Manhattan glowed beneath a pale winter sunset, while fog rolled slowly across the river outside Adrian's estate. Claire stood alone on the terrace wrapped in one of his dark wool coats, staring down at the city that suddenly felt very far away from the life she used to know. Somewhere behind her, music drifted softly through the house. Piano. Slow and quiet. The kind of music people played when they could not sleep. Claire closed her eyes briefly against the cold air. Adrian's confession from the night before still echoed inside her chest. Makes you feel human. Nobody had ever spoken to her the way Adrian did when he stopped pretending to be untouchable. That was the problem. The more vulnerable he became around her, the harder it was to remember she should probably be afraid of him. The terrace door slid open softly behind her. Claire already knew it was him without turning around. Adrian moved differently from everyone else. Calm, controlled, dangerous in a way that somehow still felt safe to her now. You should be inside, he said quietly as he stepped beside her near the railing. Claire glanced toward him. You have said that every night since I got here. Adrian slipped both hands into the pockets of his black coat, while cold wind moved through his dark hair. And every night you ignore me. A faint smile touched Claire's mouth before fading again. Silence settled between them, while the city lights shimmered below like stars trapped beneath glass. Adrian looked tired again tonight. Not physically, emotionally. Like carrying other people's fear had finally started wearing through the armor around his heart. Claire studied him carefully before speaking. Did you find anything about Daniel? Adrian's eyes shifted toward the river. Maybe. Her chest tightened instantly. Maybe. Adrian exhaled slowly. One of the warehouse managers remembered him. Claire stepped closer immediately. And Adrian looked at her then. Your brother discovered financial records tied to illegal cargo movement through the docks. Claire's stomach dropped hard. That is why he disappeared. I do not know yet. Adrian's voice stayed calm. But I know somebody wanted him quiet. Claire wrapped her arms tighter around herself against the cold. Or maybe against fear. All this time, she whispered. I thought I was imagining things. Adrian shook his head once. You were surviving. The words nearly broke her. Claire looked away quickly toward the city lights before emotion could fully reach her face. I am so tired, Adrian. His expression softened immediately hearing that. I know. I spent months thinking I was losing my mind. Her voice trembled slightly now. Every strange car outside my apartment. Every unknown number calling me. Every time somebody watched me too long at work. Adrian moved closer slowly until only inches separated them. You are not alone anymore. Claire looked up at him. Wind moved between them while the river shimmered dark beneath the skyline. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Adrian frowned slightly. Doing what? Caring this much? The question seemed to hit him harder than expected. Adrian stared at her silently for several seconds before answering. Because somewhere between your terrible coffee orders and the way you pretend you are stronger than everyone else, a faint sadness touched his expression. You became important to me before I realized it. Claire felt her heartbeat stumble unevenly. Adrian almost never spoke like this. Not openly. Not without walls. That scares me, she admitted softly. Adrian nodded once like he understood completely. Me too. They stood there quietly after that while cold wind carried the distant sounds of Manhattan across the water. For the first time in weeks, Claire did not feel hunted. She did not feel alone either. Adrian looked down at her, then with something unguarded in his eyes. Something real. You asked me once why I came back for you that night, he said quietly. Claire nodded slightly. Adrian's gaze never left hers. Because losing you felt worse than anything I have survived before. Her breath caught softly. Adrian reached up then, brushing a strand of blonde hair away from her face with careful fingers. Not possessive, not demanding, just gentle in a way nobody would ever expect from a man like him. Claire leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. Adrian's expression softened completely after that, like she had just handed him something infinitely fragile. The city glowed beneath them while fog drifted slowly across the river, and somewhere deep inside her chest, Claire realized the terrifying truth. The most dangerous man in New York had not saved her because he wanted control. He saved her because somewhere along the way, she had become the only thing capable of reaching the part of him nobody else ever saw.